Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 is flying over the Indian Ocean. It's a regular flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi with 155 people on board. Everything seems normal. Suddenly things change. 3 hijackers force their way into the cockpit. This is a hijacking. They threaten, "Listen to us or your life ends here." They force the pilot to fly thousands of miles away to Australia. The pilot tries to reason with them, but the hijackers won't listen. The fuel is running out, and below is the endless ocean. Time is running out fast. Can the pilot make the impossible happen? Will they make it, or will this flight turn into a disaster story forever? Let's find out about Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. It was a quiet Saturday morning in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was getting ready to take off, scheduled to make several stops before reaching its final destination, Abidjan in West Africa. The flight was supposed to stop in Nairobi, Brazzaville, and Lagos, covering a total distance of about 616 kilometers. It was meant to be just a routine flight, but no one on board had any idea that in just a few hours their lives were about to change dramatically. Flight 961 took off from the runway at 11:09 a.m., speeding up and climbing into the clear Ethiopian sky. Once the plane reached 39,000 feet, the autopilot was activated. The flight was commanded by 42-year-old Captain Abatek, a highly experienced pilot with over 11,500 hours of flying under his belt, well-versed in every aspect of flying. Alongside him was 34-year-old First Officer Yos Makuria, who had more than 6,500 hours of flight experience. Both pilots were very skilled and capable. They had faced bad weather, technical problems, and tough situations before. But this time things were even more serious. Captain At had dealt with hijackings before. 2 of his flights had been hijacked earlier, but each time he managed to keep the passengers and crew safe. But today's incident was different, something the world would never forget. There were 164 passengers on the flight, including 20 Indian citizens. Along with them were 12 flight attendants and 2 pilots. When the plane reached its cruising altitude, everything seemed normal. But in the back of the plane, 3 young Ethiopian passengers were lost in their own world. Their eyes held deep thoughts, and a dangerous plan was brewing in their minds. These 3 had recently graduated from university but were unemployed. They were on this flight to Nairobi, hoping to find jobs and better opportunities there. During the flight, they started flipping through the in-flight magazine when they came across some very important information. They learned that the plane they were on was flying non-stop for over 11 hours. Their mindset suddenly changed when they realized this. Nairobi was no longer their destination. The only thought in their minds was to escape Africa forever. They thought that if they could take control of the plane, they could fly it straight to Australia and seek asylum there. But there was only one way to do that. Fueled by alcohol and blind passion, they made a dangerous decision. They were about to hijack the plane. Within moments, Flight 961 was no longer under the pilot's control. At 11:02 in the morning, 3 young men stood up from their seats and one of them shouted loudly, "I've got a bomb! If anyone moves, I'll blow up the plane!" As soon as he said that, the whole plane went silent. The passengers froze. Nobody knew what was happening. Everyone stayed in their seats, too scared to even react. Then the hijackers quickly moved to the cockpit. Within seconds, they broke down the cockpit door and went inside. To scare the pilot, they lied and said there were 11 more hijackers hidden on the plane who would attack if anyone resisted. Before the pilot could even grasp the situation, the hijackers grabbed the first officer, punched him hard, and dragged him out of the cockpit. Then they forced him into a first-class seat. Now, only the captain was in control of the plane, but the danger was far from over. One hijacker picked up the emergency fire axe, while the other grabbed a fire extinguisher as a weapon. They pointed at the captain and angrily said, "Head straight to Australia." The captain's heart started racing because the plane didn't have enough fuel to make that trip without. The plane couldn't just fly all the way to Australia. It was about 8,000 kilometers. and if they tried to cover that distance without stopping, they'd run out of fuel mid-air and crash into the ocean. It was totally impossible. The captain stayed calm and tried to handle the situation. He tried to explain to the hijackers that they couldn't fly straight to Australia. They had to stop at Mombasa Airport in Kenya to refuel so they could continue the flight. But the hijackers weren't having it. They flat out refused and ordered the captain to. He took off for Australia immediately, no matter what. With every passing second, things were getting worse. The hijackers genuinely believed the plane could fly non-stop for 11 hours. They got this wrong idea because they had read something in the Airlines in-flight magazine, but they completely misunderstood it. The captain tried to explain to them, pointing to the fuel indicators that clearly showed there was only enough fuel left to reach Nairobi or Mombasa. There was no way they could make it to Australia. He didn't wake up. The captain calmly explained that there's a big difference between fiction and reality, but the hijackers weren't willing to listen at all. Their stubbornness quickly turned into anger. One hijacker threatened to blow up a bomb while keeping the other passengers under control so no one could resist. The captain realized arguing wouldn't help. If he wanted to save the plane and everyone on board, he'd have to trick the hijackers. Carefully, the captain slightly changed the plane's direction. The hijackers thought the plane was heading towards Australia, but in reality, the plane was turned towards Mombasa. Seizing this small chance, the captain contacted air traffic control. In a calm but serious voice, he reported the hijacking and said they were pretending to follow the hijackers' orders, but were actually heading to Mombasa. However, the hijackers soon grew suspicious. They saw the captain talking to the ground crew and got restless. Suddenly, an angry hijacker stormed into the cockpit, snatched the captain's headset without warning, and threw it away, cutting off all communication. Now they were completely alone, 39,000 feet up, facing hijackers inside the plane. The hijackers kept forcing the captain to fly according to their plan. To make things worse, one hijacker ordered the captain to call Australia, but that was impossible. The plane didn't have any phone system that could make international calls. Still, the captain saw a chance. Thinking quickly, he told the hijackers the truth, that calling Australia directly wasn't possible. Instead, they'd have to contact someone on the ground. They needed to get in touch with the station that could then send a message to Australia. The captain hoped that this way they could reconnect with air traffic control. If they managed that, they could update them on the hijacking situation and secretly ask for help. But the air traffic controllers on the ground in Nairobi still didn't fully understand what was happening. They needed more info to confirm the hijacking. From their perspective, the safest and smartest move was to get the plane down in Mombasa as soon as possible. The captain was aware of this. He fully realized that the danger had reached its peak, but he kept trying to reason with the hijackers, insisting that landing in Mombasa was their only option left. He tried once again to explain that the plane didn't have enough fuel to reach Australia, but the hijackers refused to listen. They were so blinded by their plan that they wouldn't accept any reality. The captain knew reasoning was useless now. He decided to take one last risk, a move that could either save the plane or things could have gotten even more dangerous when they turned on the loudspeaker so the hijackers could hear the air traffic controllers and understand that the plane was running very low on fuel. But the hijackers still refused to accept the truth. They stubbornly stuck to their demands and ignored all reasoning. Now the plane was just 40 minutes away from Mombasa, with only 2 hours of fuel left. The air traffic controllers in Nairobi still hadn't fully grasped the whole situation, and were waiting for Flight 961 to get back in touch. They were waiting, but no call came from the plane. Now the plane was flying over the Indian Ocean, and its fuel was dangerously low. The hijackers still believed they were heading towards Australia, but the captain wasn't ready to give up. Time was running out, fuel was almost gone, and there were hardly any options left. Yet, even in these final moments, the captain's mind was racing. Sitting in the co-pilot's seat, he turned the plane towards the Comoros Islands. He had already calculated that the plane was about to run out of fuel. Right before this, the plane might come near this area if they can stay close to these islands. There might be a chance to make a safe landing at some airport. Meanwhile, the hijacker leader, who had forcefully taken over the captain's seat, was drunk, drinking whiskey, and messing with the plane's controls. He had no clue how the plane worked. He was pressing the cockpit buttons and levers like a kid playing with toys. The captain warned him again and pointed towards the fuel indicators, hoping maybe this time the hijackers would understand the situation. They understood the seriousness of the situation, but the hijackers ignored them again. Their leader, who knew nothing about flying a plane, kept fiddling with the cockpit controls, making things even more dangerous. The captain realized they had very few options left. Their last hope was to keep the plane in the air until the fuel ran out completely. After that, they planned to glide the plane towards the Comoros Islands and try to make an emergency landing at some airport. It was afternoon. At 2:04, the fuel was completely gone. The engines were still running, but not for much longer. About 41 minutes before the crash, the plane had already reached near the Comoros Islands and was still flying at 39,000 feet. The captain's calculations were spot on. Then, the low fuel alarm started ringing in the cockpit. This meant the engines were about to shut down completely. The captain, desperate to save all the passengers, begged the hijackers to let him land the plane. The hijackers still didn't believe the fuel was finished and stubbornly held their ground, keeping the captain at 39,000 feet. They kept ordering to keep flying at a high altitude without realizing the plane couldn't stay in the air much longer. The plane was dangerously close to disaster. The engines could fail any second. At 2:04 p.m., the plane suddenly jolted. The right engine had failed. On one side, the deep roar of the turbofan started fading away, and a red warning light lit up in the cockpit. The captain looked at the hijackers and said firmly, "We've lost an engine." But the hijacker, still drunk and sitting in the captain's seat, just stared at the screen, not understanding what was happening. What's going on? Even the hijackers were starting to panic. They were losing control over their own hostage situation. Things were getting worse fast, and there wasn't much time left to make a decision. Hearing this, the passengers in the cabin held their breath. Some screamed out of fear. The captain slowly started turning the plane toward the Comoros Islands because the only way to survive was to stay low to the ground. But the hijackers weren't having it. One of them stormed into the cockpit, grabbed the microphone angrily, and shouted, "You're lying. Head for Australia." But there was no time to argue now. The right engine had completely shut down, and the plane was rapidly losing speed. The captain was doing everything he could to keep the plane steady and glide it toward the island. Meanwhile, the hijackers panicked. They realized the plane was going down. One of them grabbed the cockpit controls and yanked hard, thinking it would make the plane climb. Suddenly, the plane shook violently, the autopilot switched off, and the plane tilted to one side. Passengers screamed in fear as the jolt caused the plane to dive dangerously. The plane that was just a while ago flying at 39,000 feet was now dropping straight toward the ocean. The hijackers finally realized things had gotten way out of their hands. Panicking, they grabbed the controls again and tried to turn the plane in another direction. But it was too late. Both engines had shut down, and the massive plane had become a powerless glider, drifting through the air without any thrust. Without the engines, the controls had become super heavy, and the captain had to use all his strength just to make any movement. Every second was precious. If they didn't reach the ground in time, the plane was going to crash straight into the sea. Comoros Airport was in sight, but the plane was way too low. There wasn't enough time to make it there. The captain realized the truth. They wouldn't make it to the runway. There was only one option left: crash landing in the sea. The co-pilot quickly moved to the cabin to make sure all the passengers were ready for the emergency landing. That's when he noticed a terrible mistake. Many passengers had already inflated their life jackets. It was a deadly error, because if the plane started sinking, these jackets would trap them underwater, making it impossible to get out. Don't inflate your life jackets until you're outside the plane. Don't blow them up yet, the co-pilot shouted loudly. Some passengers tried to let the air out, but most were so scared they couldn't react. The sea was rushing closer fast. Only a few seconds were left. The captain was getting ready for the toughest landing of his life. The huge plane, now completely a silent glider, was about to hit the sea. Inside the cabin, everyone was gripping their seats tightly, holding their breath. Down below, the ocean waves were rising rapidly. The captain's eyes were scanning for the perfect spot to land, any place with even the slightest chance of survival. But time was running out. The plane was about to hit the water in just a few seconds. The plane tilted slightly to the left, and as the left engine and wing struck the sea surface, a catastrophic crash happened. Most of the fuselage immediately sank, leaving only the rear part floating on the water. Inside the cabin, screams erupted, turning the situation into a horrifying tragedy. Many passengers, they had already inflated their life jackets, not realizing the danger. Water started rushing in fast, and they got trapped with no way out. Locals, tourists, and even scuba divers immediately jumped in to help. Some of them were French, Swiss, and Indian doctors who were on vacation. A tourist standing on the shore was filming the plane, thinking it was part of an air show, but unknowingly captured one of the most shocking plane crashes in history. Out of the 175 people on board, 125 lost their lives. There were 119 passengers, 6 crew members, and all 3 hijackers on board. Many passengers survived the initial crash landing, but in the chaos, some didn't listen to or ignored the captain's warning not to inflate their life jackets inside the plane. As the cabin quickly filled by water, the inflated jackets pushed them up against the ceiling, trapping them with no way out. It's estimated that 60 to 80 passengers got stuck in their seatbelts and drowned. Only 50 people survived, including the captain and co-pilot. Those who fought until the very last moment to save more than one life were taken first to a hospital just 2 kilometers from the crash site, and later shifted to another medical center in Moroni. On November 30, 1996, a memorial service was held for those who lost their lives in this tragedy. This incident became famous worldwide because it was caught on camera. It was one of the rare occasions when a large passenger plane had to make an emergency landing in the sea. The first time this happened was because of a hijacking. Both the captain and the first officer were honored with an aviation award for their bravery, and they continued flying for Ethiopian Airlines. Later on, the real hero was the captain's co-pilot, Jan, who, despite being injured and covered in blood, fought off the hijackers. This gave Abba the crucial time needed to land the plane. After a full investigation, officials confirmed that the accident was caused by the hijackers, which led to the fuel running out, engine failure, and ultimately the crash couldn't be avoided. If that story made you think, then the story